gracious. Lord, have mercy on my soul and maybe some extra on my body, because I am sore in places I didn't even know I had. Wilbur, I tell you, I forgot how hot it was down here. I probably smell like a horse. Sorry, Wilbur. I've been waiting 30 years for this moment. I didn't expect to come back here by myself. You know, Wilbur, I suspect that you are as happy as I am that I got these new inventions, these split skirts, and I'm not riding side saddle through these mountain trails. You and I both will be at the bottom of the mountain at this point, I think. I know my Charlie, he'd be a mite scandalized at the idea of me wearing gauchos. But I always told him if men had to ride side saddle for 5 minutes, they'd have invented gauchos 100 years ago. I don't know if anyone told you, Wilbur, but I come from down here, down south. Some people say I have an accent, but I don't think I have one. When I was 20 years old, I met my Charlie, and we got married down here. We were going to live here forever, but there were already tensions going on. We prayed and prayed that it wouldn't come to bloodshed over the slavery, but slaves started escaping, and slave hunters started looking for them, and it was hard to know what to do and what to think even. We prayed so hard, and sometimes, well, we lost friends over it, even back then when they didn't know what we were doing in secret. I remember I had this one friend. She was so sweet and nice. She was one of the rich folks, had an antebellum mansion, and they had 100 slaves. And when I told her that the slaves should all be set free, she looked at me and said that I was cruel. She said that to just turn them out, helpless and not able to care for themselves with nothing to eat, that was just unchristian. And I just thought, it's hard to really understand where a person's coming from. So I prayed for her too. And you know, I don't know what happened to her, but she was the one that came to us that night and told us that the overseer down the road had found out that we were the ones who were harboring the slave he was looking for. And so that night we all had to escape, slaves and us, with nothing but the clothes on our backs. We haven't been back since. I'm 50 years old now. And I didn't expect to come back here alone. When the Republican Party got started, the party that was going to end slavery forever, oh my, I knew then it wouldn't end in peace. And then when Lincoln ran for president, and the South said that if a Republican won the presidency, they were going to secede, they weren't joking. They weren't idle threatening either. So when he won, they did. And when he called up for the soldiers, my Charlie, he cried. He didn't want to go after his countrymen with bullets and bayonets. But then our boy Johnny, you know Johnny Wilbur, he was your favorite. He came home with that abolition song, Battle Hymn of the Republic, mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord. And when he got to that part about Jesus, about how he died to make men holy, let us die to make men free, he said he had to go. So they went, both of them, and they died someplace here in Virginia. So they were willing to give their lives to set the slaves free, and with the years that God gives me left, I'm going to stay here and help them be educated. We're going to a freeman school, Wilbur. Freeman school that people put together money from the Freedmen's Bureau to build. Little, one room, that's all, nothing fancy. But from what I've heard from the other schools in other areas, there's going to be probably 150 little black boys and little black girls in there wanting to learn how to read. And in some places, there's the adults and even the grandmas and grandpas too, wanting to read the Bible for themselves. And I'm going to teach them. I'm going to teach them so they can read that they were made in the image of God, and Jesus wants them to be part of his family. But I'll tell you, Wilbur, we got to be prepared to not be treated real nice. You've got to be prepared to get shouted at. You've got to get prepared to have things thrown at you. It's very possible that not one single person of my color is going to let me stay with them until I get a place. But I figure you sleep outside all the time, Wilbur. I can too. So there. So we going to change the world. We going to teach people how to read, teach them how not to get cheated in the marketplaces because they can add for themselves. I think we should change the world. Wilbur, let's go. No, not go. No, I didn't mean. Whoa, Wilbur. Whoa, Wilbur. Whoa. Don't you make me use my teacher voice on you, Wilbur. Get back here. All right. We need to talk about slavery. We need to talk about the war. We need to talk about what happened before, during, and after. And what does that have to do with, is our nation a Christian nation? There is way too much to say. We are never going to get through it in time, but we'll do what we can. All right. If you see this picture up here, it is a Freeman School, and it is in Madison, Georgia. I just found it a couple weeks ago by accident. My husband was driving around looking for the Joshua Hill house, and so this building was used. There's a marker and stuff. I would love to take you to see it. In fact, there's quite a few places in Madison I would love to take you to see because it's some of the things that we have talked about in history. So I'm working on maybe a field trip for after the homeschool fellowship is finished, maybe in early June. There's even a trolley that takes people around, and I'm working on that. We'll see if it works out. This is a map. The map is, well, before we get to the map, let's get to these. I'm gonna have to come up here and push them myself because my little clicker, it broke, and it's a sad, sad thing. All right, let's do our verses. Matthew 5:14. Ye are the light of the world. A city that is set on an hill cannot be hid. 2 Chronicles 7:14. If my people, which are called by my name, shall humble themselves and pray, and seek my face, and turn from their wicked ways, then will I hear from heaven, and will and heal their land. Yes, amen. I don't know if you know, but right now, in Washington, D.C., the capital of our country, at the Museum of the Bible, America is doing a read through the entire Bible out loud. It's going to take 7 days. They're doing it from 9 in the morning until 9 at night. There's nearly 500 people taking part in this, some celebrities, some people from the White House, etc., people who care, people who believe the Bible, and people who think our nation needs to turn back to the Lord. Interestingly enough, President Trump recorded a section of it himself, and the section that he is reading includes 2 Chronicles 7:14, a very appropriate verse for our country, and I think it'd be wonderful if he applied it to himself, and he humbled himself and turned to God as well. All right, now we got to go way back, way before now. It's really cool that our nation is reading through the whole Bible out loud. I mean, I just think that's awesome. I've never heard of such a thing in our country. So the fact that it's the 250th year anniversary thing, all kinds of really interesting and really exciting things are happening this year. So it's a good year to talk about America's Christian heritage. What do you know? That wasn't on purpose, by the way. That was just God. So this map is set up to delineate, which means separating and putting in categories and whatnot, slave sections and non-slave sections of the United States. And the reason it was important, it's telling how many slaves there are, how many slaveholders there are, etc. in these different sections, and I'm sure you can guess which is which. And then there's all these ones over to the left. And the reason this was really important is before the war started, there was this thing called the Missouri Compromise. There were these laws. You know that from way back, all the way back in the Declaration of Independence, that slavery has been a hot topic, big issue, conflict, etc. And people have been making concessions, so they've been compromising about things. So even though a lot of the founding fathers hated slavery, they wanted to get rid of it to make a unified nation. They had to kind of take that out for now, and they were hoping it would fade in time. And it didn't. One of the reasons it didn't, it almost did, it almost got voted out, almost this, almost that. It's just, oh, you're so close so many times. One of the times that it was fading out because it wasn't profitable, because cotton wasn't as trendy as it used to be. But this guy named Eli Whitney, who we talk about as a great inventor, he was at his Southern friend's house and he was watching what was happening. He was like, I think I can make a machine to help you. And he made the cotton gin, which made it much easier to produce tons more cotton and make more money as long as you had more slaves. So the number of slaves went up, just like that. So I'm sure Eli Whitney was a very nice guy. I would like to slap him. However, moving on. The Missouri Compromise, part of the thing was they were making all these new laws. And as they made more new laws, most of the North would put in their constitutions and things that slavery was illegal. The South was like, nope. A little piece of history, the Southern Baptist Church became Southern Baptist aside from the other Baptists, because the other Baptists said that it was wrong to have slaves. And the Southern Baptists thought that was insulting, and so they went off and made their own group. Now, I go to a Southern Baptist church right now. They aren't like that anymore, obviously, or I wouldn't be there. But that's an interesting piece of history that's why it became Southern. Go figure. So there is so much slavery in our history, and I feel like it is this dark, sinful, giving the enemies of God a cause to blaspheme. But I'm not here to preach about it. Let's tell you about things that God is still working in our country despite our many, many sins. The Missouri Compromise was kind of like, depending on the way you vote, is whether these new states, because they're expanding, Little House on the Prairie, the Pioneers, we're going farther, we're getting more territory, all that kind of stuff. Are they going to be slave states or free states? Ha ha ha. And of course, all the politicians, whether they cared about slavery or not, that was important. Because whether you were slave or not slave, pro-slavery, not slave, it was like being a Democrat or a Republican. It meant whether you were going to win elections. It meant whether you were going to have power. It meant how were you going to vote. It meant how the whole country was going to vote. Because if enough of the country was anti-slavery, we could change the laws, and it's over. And they were so against it that they're trying to make sure that never happens, and so we end up in a war. It would have been nice if there had been some other way. Somebody pointed out to me once, one of my students, that we are the only country that had to go to war to stop slavery. A bunch of other countries stopped it, but we're the ones who fought with ourselves to do it, which is a sad thing. All right, so let's talk about the bad news first. And for the bad news, we will go to a very famous guy named Frederick Douglass. Here is his autobiography right now. For any of you older students who would like to read it, I would recommend not the younger students because it's kind of PG-13, just the fact that it talks about how bad slavery is. He had plenty to say. The one thing I will tell you about him, though, he was so cool. You know how we've talked about some of these people who just learn, like Jonathan Edwards being fluent in these languages by the time he's 14. There are these people who just want to learn. Frederick Douglass was one of them. He wanted to learn to read, but of course it was illegal to teach a slave to read. Where he was a bad version of slavery. There's no good version. But there are nicer versions and worse versions. And his wasn't so great. But he was smart. And he'd go down to the docks and he noticed there are... Yeah.
Didn't he trick kids to teach him how to read?
Yes. He would notice there are symbols on the boats. And he would notice there are symbols here and there. And so he'd be hanging out with the white kids in the neighborhood. And he'd, write something in the dirt with a stick. And he'd be like... I know what that is. What do you know? And he'd be like, kind of like, I know, and you don't know. And they'd be like, well, we know. And so they'd write stuff and be like, see, that's a whatever, and that's a whatever, and that's a whatever. And that's how he learned to read. He was a very smart guy. Well, he ended up escaping. He goes up north. He's telling people about how bad it is, but he's so... Despite the North is not like these awesome, wonderful people who love everybody so much and they're so Christ-like necessarily. A lot of them were anti-slavery, some of them for economic reasons. Some of them for other reasons, some of them couldn't care less. And some of them, even though they didn't like slavery, that still didn't mean that they thought the African Americans were equal. So keep that in mind. Just because somebody's on a certain spot does not mean they are godly or ungodly. So there's that. But he would go up north and he'd be telling all these people things, but he was so articulate and so smart and such a good speaker that people were like, you couldn't have been a slave because you're too smart. For goodness sakes, the poor guy escapes. He gets all the way up there to tell them how horrible it is and what we need to do about it. And they're like, I don't believe you. Oh, sheesh. More people just laugh. Okay. So, but he had some very good things to say. And he was very, very influential in the abolitionist movement, which abolition means to get rid of. And it was called that because it was a group of people, a lot of people, who hated slavery and wanted to get rid of it. Fanny Crosby being one of them. She almost got in a fight with somebody at a restaurant once. Okay, so I have handouts that have these quotes because they are somewhat extensive, and this way you have them to keep. Please. Oh, lofty assistant. Thank you. But I'm going to read them to you while you're passing them around. Okay, so let's look at Frederick Douglass's description of Christianity in reference to slavery, because that's what our class is about. It's not about slavery or not slavery. It's about our supposed Christian heritage. What does that mean? Can we be Christian if we've got this in our country? He said, I love the pure, peaceable, and impartial Christianity of Christ. I therefore hate the corrupt, slave-holding, women-whipping, cradle-plundering, partial, and hypocritical Christianity of this land. Ouch. Indeed, I can see no reason but the most deceitful one for calling the religion of this land Christianity. I look upon it as the climax of all misnomers, the boldest of all frauds, and the grossest of all libels. In other words, Pharisees, you call yourselves Christians, you use it as a cover to be able to be as unchristian as you possibly can. This is evil. It is the worst kind of evil. Better to call yourself an evil person if you're going to be evil than to pretend you're a Christian. What I have said respecting and against religion, I mean strictly to apply this to the slave-holding religion of this land, and with no possible reference to Christianity proper. For between the Christianity of this land and the Christianity of Christ, I recognize the widest possible difference. So wide that to receive the one as good, pure, and holy is of necessity to reject the other as bad, corrupt, and wicked. Now I need to tell you, before you just decide, everybody in the South is a horrible person. History is very complicated. And remember we talked about don't judge then according to now. A lot of the people in the South weren't slaveholders. The slaveholders were more like the aristocrats, like the rich king level people. For example, if you come drive through Madison right now, you will see a house for sale that's probably $2 million. I live down the road from that house. My house is probably 1/10th, 1/20th, like not ever going to be worth $2 million. I'd like to go and pretend I'm looking at that house to see if I want to buy it, just so I can walk through it and be like, wow, that'd be a lot to clean. You need 50 slaves to clean all of this. Those were the slave owners. They were few and far between. They were the rich elite. They're the ones who went to balls. And then you had the other people. Now, we live in what's known as the middle class. Most of us would fit in upper, lower, middle class, because that's the middle. But that exists in more of a non-socialistic country where you can work and move things up. In a lot of countries where that doesn't exist, freedom of opportunity, you have the aristocrats and you got the peasants. We talked about that in countries you've seen it with Georgie George with his fancy pants and, you know, the people way down here who had no rights at all. So that's a little bit more the way I want you to see it. You've got these people that are just very minor, and then you've got all these people, and some of the poor white people were in worse conditions than some of the slaves. So it's very confusing. A lot of the people, I would say the majority of people in the South, if I remember correctly, weren't rich enough to have slaves. So that doesn't mean that they were against slavery, it just means they didn't have enough money. You would have to ask each individual person, where do you stand on this? In fact, you could go into a plantation. You'd have to ask them too. Remember George Washington? Are you for or against slavery? He had 200 of them. And he would say, I hate it. You'd be like, what? What are you doing? What are you going to do with 200 people? You can't just be like, let's all escape together. You know, it just doesn't work. So it's very complicated. And one of the book excerpts I'm going to give you makes it even more complicated. And I want you, Hopi, did you pass those out yet?
Yes.
Okay. You should have a paper that's like 8 pages long. To me, this is a good expression between what Frederick Douglass had to say and what this book had to say. It was written by a guy who was a chaplain during the Civil War, and he was on the Confederate side. And he talks about the tons of revivals that God did during the Civil War. Now, there were revivals on both sides. You remember from the play, D.L. Moody was a chaplain during the Civil War. He would go and give people the gospel. The American Bible Society, we'll get to that. But this particular book, which I know, if you notice, it's an extra challenge this week. If you do that, read that 8 pages, write me a little thing, that's 1,000 points. That'll be a quick and easy one. Don't do it next Wednesday morning. Okay. But reading it, for one, it's beautiful because you read about all these people who are coming to Christ, the way the Bible's making a difference. That's wonderful. And then you get to the part about Stonewall Jackson and him writing about what an amazing Christian guy he is and what a great Christian he is and how well he treated his people, his slaves, and how he even started a Sunday school with all the little black kids, and he called it his little black Sunday school. And then people in town started finding out about the stuff he was doing and letting black people come in and worship. And they were like, can we come too? And like everybody loves him, even the slaves love him. And his little Sunday school, he was always worried about it, and he wanted to make sure everybody was Christian. It's like, what? So like I said, it's complicated.
Stonewall Jackson?
No, he writes about Stonewall Jackson.
Okay.
So we met him. He also writes about Robert E. Lee. So read this. It's very interesting looking at it from a certain perspective. You got to understand that, wow, God knows the heart. It's not our place to judge another man's servant, but we can look at history as a whole to understand history as a whole. So I'll just bring that back. We're not talking about individuals. We're talking about trying to look at it from a higher perspective of what's happening in history through a lot of people. Okay, so here's Frederick Douglass talking about slavery. He was in a bad situation. Now, there were others like Phyllis Wheatley. You remember her. She grew up in a very comfortable situation. Well, you know, if you can, as a slave. She was taught to read. She was given an education. She was able to prosper. Nobody was beating her. And so people had very different experiences. Slaves, not slaves. You could talk to really poor people who were white, and they're like, my situation is horrible, and my overseer beats me, and you know, this just, it's complicated. So there's that. Okay, so now we understand the bad side from Frederick Douglass, and because of the bad side, you had the abolitionists. I would have been an abolitionist. Then again, I don't know how I would have grown up and what my parents would have told me about value of people and what the different races meant, etc., etc. And so, yeah, we'll get to that in a second. But the abolitionists were quite powerful during this time period. I wish they had won. One of them was Harriet Beecher Stowe, who wrote a book, Uncle Tom's Cabin, which became very, very famous to the extent it was so powerful that when Lincoln met her, he said something to the effect of, "You're the little woman who started this big war." Because people were able to read about an individual who was a slave and their family was torn apart. And they were so incensed about it that it made the abolitionists grow. If you look on the right side of this, Jonathan Edwards wrote a thing. It was a sermon against the slave trade. You remember about him? Great Awakening. So this is nothing new. This was back in 1791. We've been working on this a long time. Makes me think of the great evil of our time and how long we've been working against that one. Which, by the way, if you know which one I'm talking about, the great evil of our time, way worse than slavery ever was, Susan B. Anthony, who was way famous way back then, she was very against it, and she was super pro-life and etc. Margaret Sanger, beginner of Planned Parenthood, was not. She was quite racist. In fact, she had a Negro project, and that was one of the reasons she started what she started, to deal with the population. If you notice, this is one of the Liberator, the newspaper you see up at top. Who do you think that is in the middle? Who's that like? Yeah, I think we're talking about Jesus or Moses, one or the other, because if you look at this little ribbon thingy, it's hard to read now because it's, 150 years old. But thou shalt love thy neighbor. Our country is the world. Our countrymen are all mankind. So you've got the black man on the left in the very popular pose that, if you remember, it was, am I not a brother? Am I not a human and a brother? And then you got on the right side, apparently the oppressive white guy who was probably beating him or something. And in the middle, you have either Christ or Moses pointing the way upward. I think that's pretty cool. What else? These were just some things I found just today, and they were so interesting. I'm like, we have to stick this in because it's just so interesting. This was a guy in Massachusetts. This is back in 1790. Again, we've been dealing with this for a long time. He was trying to take some slaves from his Christian community, probably Christian black brothers and sisters, on a ship and escape with them, which I think is awesome. He was put in jail for more than a year, and he was branded with the letters SS for slave stealer. Wow. So, John Greenleaf Whittier, which if you ever studied poetry, he's a famous poet, he wrote about him, and he switched it to salvation to the slave, which I think is awesome. What else? There were a lot more. I just picked a few. One of the things the abolitionists did was produce, lots of books, and they had speakers go around. One thing, they would do little tracts, so like little pamphlets, and one that they did for children. And it talked about the condition of slave children so that the white children who'd never encountered slaves would understand. And so education changes things. So if they'd had a little bit more time and you could raise a generation of kids who were taught black people are equal to white people, nobody should be treating someone else like this. This is what the Bible says about it, etc. Things might have changed. But the Sunday schools and the groups, a lot of them up north, would collect offerings the same way we do for like VBS and stuff, and their offerings were going to go to help in the freemen schools once the war was over. But first we have to go back to when the war is happening. And this dude right here. He was a little guy. He was about 90 pounds. And he became the vice president of the Confederacy. I had never heard of him in life. I didn't even know there was a vice president of the Confederacy. Back when everybody seceded, there was the president of the Confederacy, and the vice president was this little dude who was sick most of his life. He actually was more compromising than a lot of people, but he made a speech. And in his speech, which was about 4 weeks before the war started, he explained something that makes some things clear. So, when you talk about the Civil War, I need that, please. Some people are like, the Civil War was about slavery. And then other people, I have had people I know, be like, no, it was the War of Northern Aggression. Well, okay. The reason for this is because individuals do things for individual reasons. So there were probably hundreds of thousands of people or thousands of people who went to war to defend their hometown. Robert E. Lee was one of them. He wasn't a slave person. He was against slavery, but he was like, I'm with Virginia, and with Virginia goes, I go with my country. I think that was the wrong decision. I think he made a patriotic decision instead of a moral decision, what was right according to God. He was offered the position as leader of the army in the North. I think if he had made the choice to do what was right, the war wouldn't have lasted very long at all, and 500,000 people wouldn't have had to die. I think that's really, really sad. So your choices are very important. Make the right choice, not just what people around you are choosing. But anyway, a lot of people, if you think about it, Rutledge got burnt to the ground. So if you were some farm kid in Rutledge, you don't know what's going on in the great whole big nation. You don't read the newspaper. Maybe you can't even read. And you're like, hey, there's a bunch of people coming down with guns. Maybe you join, try and protect your family, trying to protect your home, trying to whatever. Maybe you just want to go to war because it sounds interesting. You can read about Mark Twain. Yeah. He stole pigs. But that's a whole other story we're not getting into. A bunch of boys were like, this will be fun. I'm bored on the farm. We'll just go, But that happened up north too. It's not like everybody who fought on the northern side was like, I'm doing this to free the slaves. Same thing. I'm doing it because, I'm doing it. So, again, you would have to ask every individual person. But when it comes to history, why did the war happen? The war happened because of slavery. And I say that with confidence because even the rights of the states, which is what the South likes to talk about, that was because of slavery too. So if you find the core, from about 1776 on, the big disparity between the North and the South was slaves, and it kept coming up in the laws, it kept coming up in legislature, it kept coming up with politicians, it kept coming up until it finally got to a head. The Republican Party came into existence to try and get rid of slavery. Don't know if you knew that. It's pretty cool. And just, it went, yeah. So, a few weeks before the war, my evidence is this right here. Now, there's a lot of other evidence, the laws and blah, 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 Lincoln and such. But his speech makes it extremely clear. I didn't even want to give you this because I didn't want you to think I was like, this is a good speech. If you take a look at it, I highlighted a few things. He says, Jefferson in his forecast, okay, so we're talking about Thomas Jefferson, Declaration of Independence, and the Constitution. So he's talking about the Constitution at this point. We're going to skip, we're not going to read the whole thing. We're going to read the bold parts. So Thomas Jefferson, in his forecast, had anticipated this as the, quote, rock upon which the old Union would split. He was right. He's talking about slavery. He said even Jefferson understood that this was going to be the thing that's going to split our Union if we don't get rid of it. He was right. Okay, but then here he says, and this is the reason why I'm convinced the Founding Fathers were anti-slavery, the Constitution was anti-slavery, and the South was not. He says, the prevailing ideas entertained by him and most of the leading statesmen at the time of the formation of the old Constitution, so that's our Constitution, were that the enslavement of the African was in violation of the laws of nature, as in it's wrong. That it was wrong in principle, socially, morally, and politically. Amen. It was an evil they knew not well how to deal with. But the general opinion of the men of that day was that somehow or other in the order of providence, the institution would be evanescent and pass away. In other words, we hope it'll die out. We hope people will get a clue and it will die out because it's morally wrong before God. And then here's what he has to say about that. Those ideas, however, were fundamentally wrong. Interesting. The Constitution is right, and we should do everything based on the Constitution, except the part that I disagree with. They rested upon the assumption of the equality of races. This was an error. Vice President of the Confederacy making a speech right before the war starts. Okay, let's turn the page, see what else he has to say. He has a lot more to say. It makes me so angry. Which ones do I want to say? Basically, if their premises were correct, as in black people are equal to white people, all men are created equal and endowed by their creator with certain inalienable rights, among them life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Yeah. Okay, their conclusions would be logical and just, but their premise being wrong, their whole argument fails. They were attempting to make things equal which the creator had made unequal. Now he's referencing God. Isn't that interesting? Okay, keep going. It's underlined down at the bottom. With us, all of the white race, however high or low, rich or poor, are equal in the eye of the law. Not so with the Negro. Subordination is his place. He by nature or by the curse against Canaan is fitted for that condition which he occupies in our system. After we slap Eli Whitney, we can go slap this guy. He references God. He references the scripture. He talks about cornerstones. When we stand on the eternal principles of truth, they made a new constitution based on this supposed understanding of the creator. When he mentions the curse on Canaan, y'all have probably never encountered this, and blessings upon you that you haven't. But there was a thing in Phyllis Wheatley's thing when she talks about the Negroes black as Cain, There was a thought back in the day. I actually remember hearing about it when I was a kid, that the reason the black people were the black people was because when Cain killed his brother, and he was like, if somebody sees me, they're going to kill me, and God puts a mark on him, that mark was him turning black. And that was the curse that's how the black people came, it was a curse from God. Let's think about that biblically for a second. Item 1, was the mark on Cain for a curse and that he would be mistreated for all history after that? What was it for? It was to protect him and save his life. It was mercy. Okay, let's think about something else. If he was black and everybody else is white, whatever. And what about Noah?
No.
You know, like we go back to like, it all starts from Noah again and his family. So like, that doesn't make any sense. So now he's talking about the curse of Canaan. So I guess somebody thought about that and was like, that actually doesn't make sense logically. So let's make it Canaan. Because if you remember, Noah cursed Canaan, and the Canaanites turned into the really bad race that did the bad things. The Canaanites and all the ites that were so ungodly. So somebody decided that was the curse on Canaan, was that he turned black. Now, scientifically speaking, this is ludicrous. They didn't have the science back then, but even still, this is so unbiblical. It's like deciding something and then trying to find something in the Bible that fits it, which is not Christian. That's politics. Semantics, there's a lot of words you could use for that, but it's not godly. There's only one race, it's the human race, and all the different colors are based on melanin. Melatonin is stuff you take to go to sleep. Okay, take that and it'll change colors. No, melanin, which is how much pigment you have in your system, and you can turn different colors just being out in the sun, for goodness sakes. So this was the speech he made, and later he tried to go back on it a little bit and be like, no, it was about states' rights. We got it right here. 150 years later, you can still read it. You can look it up. There it is. So it was about slavery. The end. All right. Now, does that mean that everybody in the South was an ungodly person and they manipulated the scripture so that they could be ungodly? No, it actually doesn't mean that. A lot of good things happened during the war. When things get really difficult and really dangerous, God tends to step in. That section from the book that you have talks about that from the beginning. He was like, at the beginning, there was a lot of sin in the camp, a bunch of guys getting together, it's like a fraternity at college, and there's all kinds of stuff that they weren't allowed to do at home, and now they're just sinning and sinning and sinning. And then God puts the Bible in there, and things change, and a lot of revivals happened. A lot of people got saved on the north side and the south side. We'll focus on the south side today. Okay. The American Bible Society, who we have talked about from way back in the founding, they sent out about 1.5 million Bibles during the war to the Union and the southern sides. That was a little bit difficult because supplies were getting blockaded to the south, and so a lot of the Bibles were getting blockaded, and so they had to try and, some people like risk their lives to go through the blockade to go to England to ask for Bibles because they weren't getting enough Bibles. So like people really did care, and there were people who were like, we need the scriptures, that's the most important thing. And they really worked hard to do that. Or these people were trying to get stuff to them, and it wasn't working. That dude right there, his Bible saved his life twice. And it's not the only example of them carrying around New Testaments. That's still a thing today, the Gideons. It's kind of a put it in your pocket and it'll protect your heart, because your pocket's right over your heart. Pretty cool. In your little section of your 8-page book, there is one spot that I just thought was interesting. One came to me with a tract in his hand and tears flowing down his cheeks and said, I would not take thousands for this tract. My parents have prayed for me and wept over me, but it was left for this tract to bring me, a poor convicted sinner, to the feet of Jesus. I feel today that I am a new man and have set out for heaven. There are a bunch of stories in there that you will enjoy. One of them is of this little, I think she was 4-year-old girl, and she brought up her little bit of money, like the widow's mite. Hello. And she gives it, and she says, tell my brother Johnny I said hi and use this to buy him some tracts. And then she went away because she'd given everything she had. Cool. So people were working to get the gospel to people. What? What else? Abraham Lincoln, who you probably know as a Christian, but again, we're like, well, presidents quote the Bible, does that mean anything? Well, I believe he was a true Christian. He read the Bible regularly. He read it in the White House. People saw him reading it. Sojourner Truth, who you can study about her, she was another like Harriet Tubman type person. When she visited him and a group of black pastors came to bring him a Bible, he said, I believe the Bible is the best gift God has given to man. All the good the Savior gave to the world was communicated through this book. But for this book, we could not know right from wrong. All most desirable for man's welfare, here and hereafter, are to be found portrayed in it. You'll find that if somebody's just using the Bible, they don't quote it very well. They don't quote it very comfortably. They often mispronounce things. They quote it like Shakespeare or some other book that they're reading that they're not very familiar with. And when they talk about it, they talk in very vague, generic Hallmark card type sayings. The Bible, we like the Bible. We like God, religion and stuff like that. So it's basically like, think I'm a nice guy because I said something nice about the Bible. Whereas you hear someone saying that, you hear someone saying what John Quincy Adams said in his papers to his kid, and it's like, these people know the scriptures. Find somebody who knows the scriptures and follow them. Okay, who else? This guy, he was a former governor of New York. He was Abraham Lincoln's Secretary of State, former vice president of the American Bible Society, aha! Which you notice the American Bible Society sent Bibles to the North and the South. They weren't like, we don't like you, so we're not giving you the Bible. The Bible is for everyone, regardless. It's for lost people. So the more you disagree with somebody and think they're doing wrong, the more they need the Bible. In 1856, which is almost 10 years before, the war was from 61 to 64, in case you didn't know. So this is not long before the war. He says, I know not how long a Republican government can flourish among the great people who have not known the Bible. That sounds like something Washington says. A nation cannot. Yeah. The experiment has never been tried, but this I do know, that the existing government of this country never could have existence but for the Bible. So again, we're hearing the founding of our country was on the Bible. And further, I do in my conscience believe that if every decade of years a copy of the Bible could be found in every family on the land, its Republican institutions would be perpetuated. In other words, if we want our great land to continue, we need the Bible for it. If we keep the Bible in this land, our great land will continue. That's a good thing to say. I agree. Okay, so let's get to the freedmen's schools. So after the war was over, and Lincoln declares all the slaves free, we do actually have a problem. So imagine, for some of them, they literally just walked out. Which, singing songs, a lot of the old Negro spirituals are about Moses. Go down, Moses. Let my people go. It was about freedom. And they like to sing about the Old Testament and the slaves. And so some of them were like, we're free, finally, let's go. But then what? Where do you get a job? How do you get food? Who's going to accept you? How are people going to treat you? There were still people who hated the black people, so there's still danger. What are we going to do? You got the southern people, and some of them, their boys died, their husbands died, their cousins died, and now here are these black people who are free. Some of them were like, it's your fault, so there was a difficult time. And one of the things the Freedmen's Bureau did was take up money and gather missionaries and teachers to go down south and help the freed slaves be educated. Now, if you've read the one about Booker T. Washington, you know some of this stuff. If you haven't, who has that this week? You do. Well, attack her and get it from her next week. It is exceptional. I got totally sucked in on that because I didn't know that much. But I'm also sending you a link that's an hour-long little film about him, and it's only his childhood. I wish it was 5 hours to tell you the rest of it, but it's very, very good. So teachers were coming down from the north, and they were basically, the money was to build little buildings, and so they'd be these little buildings, one-room schoolhouses, and all these kids would come flooding in because they weren't allowed to learn to read and write before. And so it's not just the kids who want to learn to read, and people wanted to learn to read the Bible. And they also recognized that if you wanted power, if you wanted, not power as in corrupt power, but just the power to make your own choices, have your own opportunities, not get cheated at the marketplace, you had to learn. One of the things I was watching was talking about, they figured out real quick that the super poor white people and the super rich white people, the difference was education. The difference in opportunity and ability, and it still is in a lot of ways. You can tell the difference between the levels of class difference because of educational abilities or educational opportunities. Because if you can't learn to read, how many opportunities do you have? So they wanted to learn, and so they started these schools, and I think it's really awesome and great. It was tough. They often mistreated by people, but they did it anyway. Sometimes you suffer now for the future generations. Remember John Winthrop, remember William Penn, remember all these people who were willing to risk their lives and give their lives on the Mayflower and afterwards so that the future generations could be free to worship God. That's what people keep doing in very largely sinful historical moments. God's people come forth, or at least they should. Okay, let's talk about Booker, one of my favorite people from that time period to study. There were a bunch of them. He's just one. There are so many more you could study about. But he was on the other side. Here's Frederick Douglass, who was angry and this is wrong, and he's like the prophet. Jeremiah, this is evil, this is wrong, we gotta stop it. Booker was more like the John of the New Testament. Let's teach love, let's grow, let's try and do good things so that they recognize we're worthy of respect instead of just demanding respect because we are equal. Both of them were right. And so there's no reason that the person who's doing the prophet and the John, the disciple who Jesus loved, should be fighting each other. They're fighting the same thing. They should be helping each other. So what Booker had to say is not wrong just because it differs from what Douglass has to say. So let's see some of the things he had to say. We all know that in America, slavery was established for selfish and financial reasons, not for a missionary motive. You're like, why would he even have to say that? Because some people, we're bringing the poor deprived Africans over here so they can get saved. Go to Africa, for goodness sakes. Thank you, David Livingston, for doing so. No. There were a lot of lies that were told to a lot of people. Them, the black people being, All right, perhaps the most valuable thing that I got out of my second year in school, he went to a Freedmen's school, was an understanding of the use and value of the Bible. As I have stated, it was a whole race trying to go to school. The great ambition of the older people was to try to learn to read the Bible before they died. I just love that so much. I would love teaching an 80-year-old person how to read so they can read the Bible for themselves. Okay, let's see what he has to say, and we're going to have to quit soon. In no other consideration had convinced me of the value of the Christian life. So again, Frederick Douglass is like, this Christianity is wrong because it's not true. This Christianity is great. He's talking about the Christianity in America that is the true Christianity. If no other consideration had convinced me of the value of the Christian life, the Christ-like work which the Church of all denominations in America has done during the last 35 years for the elevation of the black man would have made me a Christian. That is a great thing to say. You want people to say, because of your life, I'm convinced that Christianity is true. In a large degree, it is in the pennies, the nickels, and the dimes which come from the Sunday schools, the Christian Endeavor societies, as well as from the church proper, that have helped to elevate the Negro at so rapid a rate. That's where things like this come from that hopefully we'll get to go see on the field trip. Okay, so then we get to this very, very important question. So all that, you've been here for 12 weeks now. You've had evidence and evidence and evidence, but here and here and here. Are we a Christian nation? Yes, no, yes, no, maybe. Is America a Christian nation? Come back next week. So we can talk about the t-shirt religion and figure it out.